the use cases for blockchain, for enterprise are basically all business agreements. Every 2 weeks, we kind of publish a pipeline data. And every 2 weeks, I'm like, there's no way this can continue. And it continues. I've spent a decade trying to convince people that private chains are not a good idea, that they are fundamentally pointless. The truth is, you can't control the internet. Bad things happen on the internet, but we use the internet all the time anyway. AI is going to speed up blockchain adoption. We are approaching the point where we will have the first single entrepreneur billion-dollar startup. It's the number one dilemma that we talk to clients about, which is,
hi, this is Violetta Chekan, or just VC, and that I'm a venture capitalist, and I have 12 years in startups and early stage investing. And this is season 3 of Web3 Plus One with VC show. And today we have Paul Brody, who is a global blockchain leader at EY and also chairman at Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And he's also an author of the book of Ethereum for Business and received also a couple of awards as well for the blockchain leadership. Well, thank you so much, Paul, to come into this podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
First of all, I would like to ask you, so in terms of technology life cycle, so where we are right now for blockchain technology, and what does it mean for enterprises, and where should they invest?
So we are now at what I think about as the beginning stages of the mainstream adoption phase. So there's an early adopter phase, right, with some ups and downs. And we are zeroing in on a set of use cases and business cases for enterprise users that are driving large-scale adoption. We're at the beginning of that phase, but that's where we are. We're in the mainstream adoption phase, which means that we're going to have a very steady ramp of enterprise users over the next 20 years or so. We've looked very carefully at mainstream adoption phases for new technologies, network equipment, ERP, mobile phones. What we see is that typically in the enterprise, mainstream adoption takes somewhere between 15 and 25 years. And typically during that time period, these markets grow by about 15 to 25% a year during that time period.
Okay, and where is the enterprises should invest right now? Should they invest in initiatives, in piloting, or active already deployment of the projects?
So we're in the full scale use and deployment phase now. We're past the pilot phase for some of the early use cases. What we're going to see now is this cycle of use case, development, adoption, scale. The use case that is scaling first is stablecoins. So there are a few enterprises that are adopting ETH or Bitcoin for their treasury. That's never going to be, I think, a really huge thing. Those are enterprises that are copying the strategy of strategy, and maybe there's a limited space in the market for them. But you got to remember, if you wanted to buy ETH or Bitcoin, you can just buy today ETH or Bitcoin on the stock exchange through the ETFs and so on. So I'm not clear on how much room there is in the business ecosystem to copy that strategy. Where I think the most practical adoption is going to be in the medium term is all around stablecoin payments and stablecoin usage inside the enterprise. Basically, there's a big value proposition to be had, especially moving cross-border payments from traditional banking rails to crypto and stablecoin rails. And doing that is going to pay for itself as the tools for adoption mature.
Awesome. And there is a data about the use cases and initiatives. So it says that the businesses that have been surveyed, it's 80% of them are right now deploying blockchain initiatives. What data do you have? Because you were saying that it's already an active deployment. So what is actually happening in terms of data for that?
We don't keep a huge amount of data. We see the surveys that other people use. I don't have an official survey. What I sort of feel like is that all of our banking clients are asking us how to launch a stablecoin. That's something that's going on in the banking side. Over on the enterprise side, I would not say that all of our clients are asking about how to use stablecoins, but I would say that quite a few are dipping their toes into this space. They're looking at specific use cases where there are countries or markets or specific routes between countries where they think they want to use stable coins, and they're starting to adopt those. And very importantly, adoption is being built into their automated enterprise systems. So it's not something that's expensive to handle manually. It's something that's going to get done in a fully automated way.
So they're using this in the daily operation. That's what you're saying.
Yes, we're going to start seeing that more and more.
And in terms of UI, so can you maybe talk a little bit more about like your tools and how many clients do you have and what are the use cases that you're working together with enterprises?
We do a couple of things. So first and foremost, we are a very traditional, professional services firm amongst the big four. So we do financial statement audits, we do tax advisory, and we do consulting work, right? And we are doing lots and lots on all of those. We're just in the second year of what has just been a monumental boom in that space. We've got some of our blockchain capabilities. Their businesses are growing by 3, 4, 500% year to year, which is kind of mind blowing. In fact, every 2 weeks we kind of publish like a pipeline data, and every 2 weeks I'm like, there's no way this can continue, and it continues. Now, I think a lot of this is driven by the fact that we do a lot of regulatory compliance work. So all these banks that we serve, all these institutions that want to do things like sell digital assets to their customers, that want to adopt or build or deploy a stablecoin, there's a fair amount of regulatory documentation and compliance work that's upfront, and we're doing a ton of that. And our market has very much shifted towards that. There's also a huge amount of tax work going on, and there's quite a bit of financial statement audit work going on, although that's a somewhat slower ramp because it takes time to be accepted and to be adopted as an audit client. What is going to come after this will be from the regulatory documentation to the actual implementation and the building out of stablecoins and digital asset practices at a lot of financial institutions.
Interesting. How did you come, by the way, to EY? So, what is like your story?
My story is this. So, back in 2013, I was a vice president at IBM, and I was in charge of the global electronics industry. And one of the conversations that I had a lot with clients and specifically with Samsung was, what does the future look like in a world where we have lots and lots of smart devices? And one of the strange things about all these smart devices that we carry around with us is we have the smart device, and the smart device also uses a bunch of cloud infrastructure. But what is the cloud? The cloud is just somebody else's computer somewhere else. So why is it that if I have like 5 smart devices and I want to have cloud infrastructure, or I want device A to back up device B, why do I need extra infrastructure in like a big data center? Why can't my network devices back up each other? Why doesn't the refrigerator provide backup services to the dishwasher, right? Why do I need all this cloud infrastructure, which by the way is quite expensive? It's not cheap. It takes time to manage and costs a lot of money. So I had a client, Samsung, and they had a visionary there, TJ Kong, and he was like, listen, I think it'd be cool if we could do something about this. And I had this idea, listen, for years and years and years, people have been trying to develop distributed computing, making this sort of cloud be all of your devices. And so we thought we would give it a try. We thought maybe the market is mature enough. And we started actually down the path of Bitcoin. And it was interesting. Like, Bitcoin is a decentralized computing system, and it has something cool, which is it's got accounts and payments. And we had this interesting idea that we don't know what people will buy and sell with the Internet of Things, but they will buy something. And therefore, it'd be really useful to have an infrastructure like Bitcoin that can buy and sell stuff as a part of it. So we started building stuff on Bitcoin. And about halfway through, one of my engineers came to me and said, listen, Bitcoin is not working very fast, but I've met this guy, and he's got this really cool idea, which is he wants to take Bitcoin and make it way faster and also programmable. And the guy in question was Vitalik Buterin. And so we switched halfway through. We switched from building the prototype on Bitcoin to building a prototype on the alpha version of Ethereum. We finished that work in 2014, and we showed it at the Consumer Electronics Show in January of 2015. And by then, I was a convert. I was an Ethereum convert. I was like, this is going to be transformational. It's going to be transformational in money, in business, in supply chain, in accounting. This is what I want to go do. And came to EY, where they were much more open to this idea of building an entirely new business around blockchain, specifically at the time.
And yeah, and since then you are actually very vocal about that you support Ethereum. So why Ethereum, and do you consider any multi-chain strategy?
So why Ethereum? That is a great question. And in some ways, I can say, well, it was kind of my first crypto blockchain love, right? But the answer is a bit more pragmatic. So when I came to EY, one of the questions I had to figure out was, okay, we're going to have, EY was enthusiastic to build stuff, but it's not like they handed me like, a blank check and said, spend however much you want. I had a limited budget. And so one of the principles of managing a team and being effective is when you have a limited budget and you can build a certain amount of expertise, it's better to be really good. I believe it's better to be really good at one thing than mediocre at a bunch of things. So one of the early considerations I made was we're going to build stuff and we're going to build on only one blockchain because we can only be really good at one of them. So which one should it be? And at the time, Ethereum was the largest. It wasn't necessarily the best. It's still not necessarily the best, but it has since then and up until this point always been the largest. And so for me, it's a relatively pragmatic, strategic decision, which is we are going to be the best at the largest blockchain ecosystem, and that is Ethereum. Now, you asked me, do we have a multi-chain strategy? The answer is no. And the answer is no for a reason, which is if you look back at the history of technology, what you see over and over again is that we don't actually live in very diverse technology ecosystems. Microsoft Windows is 90% of all desktop PCs. Android is 90% of all mobile phones. TCP/IP is 99.9% of all computer networking, right? We live in a world of really robust technology standards. And so my expectation is that usually what happens is at some point, the biggest system isn't just the sort of first among equals, it becomes the dominant system. And so I truthfully don't really have a cross-chain integration strategy because I don't think there's going to be any other chains that are going to have meaningful value and programmability outside of Ethereum. I think Bitcoin has a special place as a kind of digital form of gold, but it's not going to be a place where you do a lot of programmable infrastructure or digital asset design.
Wow, that is a very interesting point because if you are an enterprise and you want to build on blockchain, right? So how do you make the decision, right, between the chains? Where do you go? How do you go? But I also want to take this conversation actually to the why public chains. We still have conversations about private chains, and I want this to make it clear why, as an enterprise, you should use public chain, not the private chain, and what is the
So,
benefits?
so the public chain question is more a fundamental question of it's in some ways it's really a test of whether or not you understand what it is that blockchains are for. If you think that blockchains are just a programming environment, then a public or private blockchain doesn't really matter all that much. But they're not. They're a networking environment. And in a networking environment, you want the maximum level of connectivity. There are two problems with private blockchains. First, they create substantial lock-in and risk for business users, right? It's very easy to find yourself captive in somebody else's private blockchain in the same way you might find yourself captive in somebody else's sort of supply and demand ecosystem. Secondly, though, fundamentally, if 10 companies or 50 companies or 1,000 companies could agree upon a single provider to run a programming and blockchain environment for them, which is what you're doing in a private blockchain, then why wouldn't you just pay a cloud provider to run a server for you? And by the way, building on a Web 2.0 server, way cheaper than trying to build on like a private blockchain. So if you can all agree on a single provider, then the best thing to do is build on Web 2. But the value proposition of Web 3 is that it is decentralized. It has no other, honestly, substantial, meaningful value proposition other than decentralization.
And decentralization, I think, is often misunderstood as a concept by enterprises. So, what are the misconceptions do enterprises have? How do you communicate with them when they talk to you about public versus private chains?
That's a really tough question. I've spent a decade trying to convince people that private chains are not a good idea, that they are fundamentally pointless. And I have no magical argument to explain why. People have lots of reasons like, oh, public blockchains are dangerous. There's bad actors on them. Money laundering happens on them, right? You can't control them. But the truth is, you can't control the internet. Bad things happen on the internet, but we use the internet all the time anyway, right? One of the most interesting things, kind of hilarious, is a lot of people are like, well, we need to be on a private blockchain because we need privacy. And what they don't understand is that private blockchains have no privacy. There is no, to the other members of the blockchain, there is no privacy. So if you're a large company and you want to bring all of your suppliers onto your private blockchain, that's not going to work because you don't want company A, who's competing with company B in your supply chain network, to see how much you're ordering from them or what you're paying. So interestingly, private blockchains, people think they have privacy. They don't. There's no privacy on a private blockchain for all the members. There isn't. We are building privacy systems for public chains, but the arguments for private blockchains are just fundamentally not very good. And yet, I have no magical like argument or explanation. It turns out the number one thing that leads people to put stuff on public blockchains is having tried a private blockchain and failed. That's like the number one indicator.
Yeah, we work also with corporations, and this is the first maybe question that they ask because public chain, they think that everything will be public. So can you explain a little bit how EY also helps? And I know that you have also some tools for that. How does it solves this problem at this moment?
Yeah, so one of the kind of really amazing things, I personally I'm always really inspired by stories of technology history. This is a great thing. And maybe it's just because I love history stories, or maybe it's because my mother was a software developer in the 1960s. But I love these stories of technology history. And one of the great stories of technology history is that the early days of the internet also had no privacy. If you emailed somebody in the early days of the internet, your email went to them completely unencrypted. Anybody who received it along the way could read it, like from to all the contents. And that was something that also held up a lot of e-commerce. People were like, I'm not going to put my credit card number in if anybody along the way can intercept that credit card number. E-commerce and the web didn't really take off for useful commercial applications until we had SSL certificates and public key encryption with privacy on web browsers. The same form of history is actually being repeated in the world of blockchain and crypto, right? We don't have any privacy today, and therefore it's no surprise that large companies don't want to use blockchains for anything very substantial because they don't want to tell their competitors, what are we buying, how much are we paying, where is it going? So since I started here at EY 10 years ago, my number one priority from an engineering standpoint is to work on building viable privacy systems for enterprise users. Now, I thought this was going to take like 2 years. Like I thought like this is a 2-year project. Here we are 8 years later, and I feel like we are finally ready for prime time. We're on version 4 of something we called Nightfall, which is our a solution that we developed and put into the public domain for blockchain for private transactions and payments. And we are about 4 or 5 years into a second product that we developed called Starlight, which allows you to build complex smart contracts that also can run under privacy on a public blockchain network. And we're starting to deploy those. We have use cases. We have real case examples of how they can be used by businesses. And we're just at the early stages of adoption.
And you mentioned the use cases. So what are the use cases that you already have? Can you share some?
Yeah, so fundamentally, I believe that the use cases for blockchain, for enterprise, are basically all business agreements. Fundamentally, every business agreement boils down to this. I have money, you have stuff, and we're going to exchange my money for your stuff under the terms of some kind of agreement. That's it. That literally describes every single business agreement on earth, like in a relatively simple way. The money can be turned into tokens, right? Stable coins or crypto. The stuff, products, services, whatever it is, that also gets represented as a token. And then the business agreement to exchange them is a smart contract. So the use cases are phenomenal. You can take any business agreement and automate it using blockchain, provided you have privacy. Now, if you do payments with fungible tokens, which are just US dollars, you can do some level of payments without privacy because the tokens are fungible. You might be going through a business partner. Fungible tokens in a sea, one set of fungible tokens in a sea of fungible tokens is not that easy to trace. But almost everything that large companies make is serialized, which means it's non-fungible. So as soon as you start to build the whole agreement, not just the payment, but also the stuff and then the terms and conditions, it becomes very easy to track what's going on, especially if you and I are doing business a ton. Like, think about how much like Walmart does with a big supplier of soft drinks or something, right? They're going to do business like thousands of times a day. It becomes easy, even with just using fungible items, to see where that stuff is going. So we're waiting for business is waiting for proven privacy technologies to do large scale adoption. The value is enormous. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of the value. First, stablecoins, right? You can use, if you can use stablecoins instead of international wire transfers, you basically can reduce your wire transfer cost, your sort of payment cost, by 99%, right? Basically from like $40 or $50 down to a couple of cents. Great deal, right? It's only a good deal, by the way, if you feel comfortable, you have enough privacy, and you have system automation so that it doesn't require a lot of manual futzing around to make that work. Secondly, smart contracts can run enterprise processes way more efficiently. We have experience working with clients like Microsoft, where we're able to take the time required to administer a contract from 45 days down to like 4 minutes. So we know there's a huge return on investment for smart contracts. We know there's a huge return on investment for payments. We know that if you run a supply chain using blockchain with high accuracy, you can cut your operating cost of the whole supply chain by 10 to 20%. So there's a lot of cool use cases that are all waiting on maturing privacy technology to be deployed at scale.
And one question is, what is the most overhyped use case that everyone talks about but actually doesn't make any sense?
Financial inclusion. So this is super frustrating for me. Like you especially early on in the world of crypto and blockchain, you'd have these people go to Capitol Hill or testify in front of governments and be like, we need blockchain because it will give people access to the banking system. This usually just isn't true. Like the reality is that in many countries where people don't have good access to the banking system, it's not because bank costs are too high or that banks don't want to serve them. It's that there's too many regulatory obstacles to serving them. If you need to have, and there were real examples of, there's fewer and fewer today, but if, let's say you need to have two forms of ID and a utility bill and a mortgage statement or a check, a canceled check, to prove that you are who you are in order to open a bank account. Well, in a country where very few people own property, or you don't have an electric bill because you don't have electricity, or you don't have two forms of ID because you're a refugee, those people just can't get access to the banking system. And it doesn't matter whether the banking system is built on crypto, right, or blockchain or any other system. It's entirely irrelevant. And if you look at places like India or Brazil or parts of Europe that have changed the rules for how you can access a bank account, you can see incredible performance in terms of like adoption of bank accounts and access to financial services. So, it was a cover. I call it like social justice washing, this claim that like crypto is needed to give people access to bank accounts. That was never true. And there are no countries I can think of where that's really held up.
And what is the entry point for the enterprises usually? Are they, for example, if they want to deploy some project on blockchain, and what is the entry point? Do they go to such innovation leaders as EY, Accenture, etc.? Is it go to acceleration programs, like to work with startups? Is it they go to hiring teams? What is the entry point?
So early on in the technology, the entry point is often that big companies either hire their own team, or they have an innovation department, or they go to a big company and say, we want to do something, please build us a customized project with a bunch of consultants, right? Because there isn't anything productized. But where we are headed now, when you get to mainstream adoption, you're implementing product, right? And all the complexity of how this product works, you don't need your own engineers, you don't need your own staff, right? If you can interact with an API, right, which a lot of enterprise developers can, if you can set up Stripe, right, or some other API based service, then you're going to be able to set up Circle or USDT or some of the crypto interfaces, right? So one of the things that's driving mass adoption is the fact that the core things required to get on board are now productized. They have APIs, they have documentation, They have standardized user interfaces, and that's something that enterprise developers, they can read the documentation, plug it in, and make it work. And they don't need any PhDs in math, no PhDs in cryptography, no blockchain experts. It just kind of works like any other cloud service.
Well, that's a very interesting point because what I'm seeing from the enterprises, they often say that, well, they don't understand blockchain and they fear kind of blockchain. What other fears like have you noticed on the market when once you talk with enterprises?
Yeah, this is actually a really, really interesting thing, and it's the number one dilemma that we talk to clients about, which is many of them feel like blockchain, especially at the moment, it's like a casino. It's crazy risky. There's people in there gambling. They're pumping meme coins. They're rugging, DeFi projects. Like it looks scary and dangerous, but it also feels like a place that you have to be in order to grow. And so we tend to agree on both of those, right? Blockchain crypto market at the moment looks scary and dangerous. It looks like there's a lot of scammers and frauds going on. It looks like there's all kinds of pump and dump schemes going on. That some of the market signals are not particularly reliable. But it also looks like there are really useful use cases that are reaching maturity and can be adopted. And so our message is there are a limited number of vendors and business partners that you can use to plug this stuff in. And it is very similar to the internet, right? Same thing was happening, 20 or 30 years ago with the internet. There were bad things going on. There were schemes and scams. There still are. Most of the schemes and scams that we deal with today get started on the internet, right? The challenge is you assemble a network of vendors, you plug them in, and you work with sort of reliable and trusted partners. And that's kind of where we would like to be. We want to be one of these trusted partners that helps you implement proven use cases, and you don't really need to understand all the plumbing. And the truth is, today you can go in the web 2.0 world, you can go to like Shopify, you can set up a web storefront. You don't know anything about SSL certificates or online payments or anything. It just kind of works. That's what we want to get to for crypto. We're not quite there yet, but we are getting closer and closer by the day.
And what makes enterprises come to you right now, like in 2025? Like, what is like the main, like they say, we need blockchain for, or we think that blockchain can help us. So, what is the message that they come with?
So it depends kind of where the discussion originates inside of an enterprise. If you're talking about a financial institution, they're there to build on blockchain. So they want to use digital assets, they want to tokenize assets, they want to sell digital assets to clients, they want to potentially build or launch their own stable coins or asset backed tokens. So they want to enter this business. It's like a new form of stock or bond market. They want to be in there and they want to participate. So that's one source. They're very focused on being in the blockchain market. There's another source, which is that sort of non-financial companies. They've heard that there's a use case that's very efficient and can save them a lot of money. But we've got big clients who they're like, we make millions and millions of payments. We need a cheaper way to do this.
And what is the usual investment that the company needs to make once they decided, okay, we are going to deploy this project on the blockchain? So you said that there is like easy, there is APIs, etc., but there is still some investment that you need to make. What is the usual?
That's a really tough question. I would say for large companies deploying simple use cases like adding digital payments functionality, blockchain payments functionality to your SAP system, you're probably talking about a few $100,000, right? And something that will get you a return on investment, depending on how many international payments you do, relatively quickly, right? If you make a couple thousand international payments and you move them from $50 each or $40 each to 10 cents, that's a few months of return on investment almost immediately. So, that's within reason. It goes higher from there if you want to do things like complex smart contracts, built-in privacy, integration with suppliers, supply chain management. I mean, obviously you can spend an unlimited amount of money, but I would say if you're a large company and you have a relatively mature ERP system and you're already transacting electronically with banks, then it's probably a couple $100,000 at the low end to get your feet into this business with some consultants and technical help, and it goes up from there.
And you talked about ROI, right? And I would love to understand, like, how do you measure in EY the efficiency and success of blockchain initiatives and the projects?
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. We kind of run a shadow P&L. So we look at the revenue that we get from blockchain, and the margin that's associated with that. And we look at it in a couple of ways. First of all, we often have uh, bigger contracts that may include a small portion of blockchain. So when that happens, we go to the account executive in charge of that client and say, okay, we know that you're doing a certain amount of blockchain work at this client as a part of a particular project. What percentage of the value would you assign to blockchain? Right. And so we will, it might be $100 million contract, but they say, okay, 10% of that is blockchain. So we count that as, $10 million for blockchain. So we do that. We track every single deal. And then we look at the firm wide, like the average margin data. So we know, we basically know year on year what our revenue is. We also keep track of, but don't really talk a lot about, what I would call sort of wider influence. Sometimes that $100 million contract, we wouldn't have won it unless we knew how to do the $10 million worth of blockchain really well, right? So the blockchain skills help us influence that. And then we've built some great relationships with some of the best companies in crypto, and they buy a lot of non-blockchain services from us. And again, we don't count that towards the blockchain total, but we see that as something that we've helped influence.
Can AI actually accelerate blockchain deployment? And also, I would love to also a little bit understand how AI agents work also on blockchain, and what is the future on that for the use cases?
So I'll split this into two parts. First of all, is AI going to help us deploy blockchain faster? The answer is yes. And the reason the answer is yes is because every process transformation inside of a company consumes like mental bandwidth, right? Somebody says, hey, I want to use Ethereum for payments. Look at all the places in our business where there are payments processes, and analyze like what kind of effort would be required and what changes are to be made. Traditionally, you'd have to get like a whole bunch of staff or consultants to do that, and that's a multi-month project. I think as AI gets better and better, you can give a map of your system or its code base or a bunch of other data to an AI tool, and it will do 80 or 90% of the work for you. And instead of spending 2 or 3 months doing the work, you'll spend a couple of weeks checking the work and fixing all the mistakes and the places where the AI got stuff wrong. So AI has this ability to compress any kind of like substantial intellectual project of workflow and analysis. And just by that, it's going to compress things. Anywhere where you have to write new code, AI is going to speed that up as well. Like if you think about, hey, I currently have a bunch of banking interfaces, and I now want to rewrite those banking interfaces to also support crypto and blockchain. Again, that's the kind of thing where, AI tools are going to help you do it better and faster and cheaper. So absolutely, in a lot of ways, big and small, AI is going to speed up blockchain adoption across the board. Secondly, though, to your second question, really, are we going to have this future of AI agents working with blockchain? The answer is yes. In fact, we are just putting together our first proposals now with clients to build prototype networks. And at least the way I see it, the value blockchain and AI are wonderfully complementary, because blockchain systems do something fantastic, which is extremely reliable transaction execution under very specific rules. But blockchain-based smart contracts are purely deterministic. They're not very smart, and you don't want to make them too smart, because that makes the whole on-chain system overly complicated and computationally intensive. AI systems, on the other hand, are fantastic at taking all kinds of different data and coming up with ideas and recommendations, right? And so what we're going to have is we're going to have these agentic AI systems. They're going to make decisions and recommendations. They're going to, you imagine unleashing an agentic AI system on the retail inventory levels in a store of every single item. And it's going to say, listen, summer's coming, so we're going to stock more ice cream, right, and less Brussels sprouts. I'm just making this up, right? But AI systems have the bandwidth and the brain power to come up with lots of recommendations. And then blockchain will be about implementation, right? So if the AI system says, listen, you need to order a bunch more ice cream, and you need to cancel a bunch of these orders for other stuff, then the blockchain will actually go and do that. And whereas AI systems are very clever, but not always super accurate or consistent, blockchain systems are relatively rigid. They are extremely reliable, right? They will execute those recommendations with great reliability. So I think these things are beautifully complementary. One is about decision making and the other is about execution.
Yeah, before we go to like how the company will look like in 2030, I would like to ask you one quick question. So we talked about also that enterprises think that it's casino, right? The blockchain, crypto, but we cannot ignore the cycles. There is bull cycle, there is bear cycle. How you as a corporation, as EY, do you consider this in your strategy? Are you seeing that enterprises also being affected by the market cycles?
Enterprises are definitely affected by the market cycles and they're affected by the regulatory cycles. It's very interesting when the price of Bitcoin or crypto plunges and there's a big scandal like FTX and the regulators like crypto bad, right? Then lots of companies pull back on their aspiration to use blockchain, even if they weren't going to use it for something financial, right? They just generally see it as like risky or dangerous or not very good. Right now, we're having this like surge of enthusiasm and people are moving forward and they are deciding to do more. And so we're benefiting from the reverse of this, which is that, good regulatory rules encourage people to use blockchain, even if they're not doing something financial. It's kind of interesting. Like they just perceive the overall, like it's approved, it's safe, it's okay to use it. So that part is good. We're on the positive version of that cycle for the first time in quite a while. At every sort of cycle, things go up and they go down. They usually settle at a higher level. And this continues on. And then we try to think carefully about sort of how we invest our business so that we're not caught by surprise when the next down cycle happens.
And you mentioned there is a positive environment right now. So just to mention a couple of things, what are the most favorable things that are happening right now in 2025?
So if you were to go back to 2024, especially or even late 2023, well, we were in a phase of what I would call gradual global regulatory convergence, right? Country after country was slowly but surely legalizing and putting regulatory structures around cryptocurrencies and blockchains. But it was honestly happening very slowly, particularly in the United States. In 2024, especially towards the end of the year, with the election of Donald Trump, we had this explosive acceleration towards, regulatory compliance, legalization, and kind of rules and structures. And that kicked off a tremendous amount of activity and demand. Everybody wants to be in this business. They're seeing it as permanent. And so that is the biggest driver, is the regulatory changes. Second big driver is the maturing of the use cases. People are just more comfortable with the infrastructure, the providers, and I'll give you a good example. SAP is the world's most widely used ERP system, right? It's the most widely used system that companies use to run their operations. Over the last 9 months, SAP has built out and deployed something called the Digital Currency Hub, which allows you to plug stable coins and digital assets directly into your ERP system and automate services and tools around it. That kind of automation is absolutely critical for making this a viable service. If you have to do lots of manual work, all the money you save on, say, lower bank fees gets disappeared in extra manual labor. But if you have a fully automated system inside the company, then you get to keep all the extra savings that you get by switching from, say, traditional banking and wire fees to crypto rails. So the maturing of the tooling environment, especially in the enterprise, is having a really big positive impact as well. And I hope that we will look back in 2026 and say the maturing of the privacy environment had a similar accelerating effect on enterprise adoption.
And now the 2030, how the company will look like in the future with AI agents, with blockchain, with all the smart contracts execution. We would be like one person, the company, that there is obviously like this media narrative that happens. What is your opinion on that?
I do. I love this idea that we are approaching the point where we will have like the first single entrepreneur $1 billion startup, right? And I really do believe, I think we've been on this interesting trend for like 30 years now, which is that things that were once only accessible to large companies, like are slowly more and more accessible. Like 30 years ago, to build a website and sell stuff required a quite sophisticated company to do stuff, right? And you needed to hire a lot of clever people and invest a lot in core technology. Today, anybody can build a website, and it looks and functions as good as the best e-commerce websites did 15, 20 years ago, right? I could set up the Paul Brody web store and it could look as slick as Amazon.com did like 20 years ago, right? That would be amazing, and it's so easy to do, right? That trend is only going to continue, right? As AI tools and blockchain tools and just kind of the overall maturing of the web is going to make it harder and harder for large companies to explain what their differentiated value proposition is. If you can deploy an army of smart agents, you have clever sort of blockchain tools for integrating business partners and suppliers, you've got a really slick website. Um, I think we are headed towards this world where smaller companies and individual entrepreneurs will find it easier and easier to build infrastructure and capability that was once upon a time the province of only very, very large firms. I don't want to be a solo entrepreneur. I like working in a team.
No.
I want to have people with me. So, I don't need 50,000 of them, but like 50 or 100, that to me is like a sweet spot. I love the blockchain team that we have at EY. I love the kind of the global leadership group that we have. I don't want to come into work every day by myself.
Yeah, team is really inspiring. Yeah, and gives also ideas. And I have this segment right now in my podcast. So, what if you start over? So, if you start over, but as an entrepreneur, so what idea would you right now implement? Whom do you take as your co-founder? And imagine how would you invest if you have 1 million of investment?
Okay, so if I were starting over today as an entrepreneur, I would build something that links the real world to the Ethereum blockchain, right? So we are still right now. People are super obsessed with financial services, moving money around on the blockchain and creating dollars. But I think one of the important questions is going to be, what are you going to buy with those dollars, right? And we live in a real world where people want to buy cars and houses and they want to borrow warehouse space. And so I think I would try to build something that takes a business to business solution like warehousing or logistics or something, tokenizes it, puts it on the public Ethereum blockchain, and is transformational in terms of the supply chain and logistics. So I would absolutely do something on blockchain. I would do it with a ton of AI. Like I'm not a great coder. I'd have a lot of software development. I think ChatGPT might be my co-founder, um, and I think I would hire somebody who, or make as a co-founder, somebody who really understands how to build using AI. I don't want just a traditional coder. I want somebody who knows how to have like a multiplier effect so that we can have, we can build what feels like $1 billion business with half a dozen employees, not 500.
And if you have 1 million of investment right away, how would you invest this?
So for $1 million, I would say, generally speaking, as somebody who spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, everything is about your run rate, right? And one of the, I think, mistakes that people make in Silicon Valley is they think, if I hire 9 people, it's like, can you hire 9 people and have a baby in 1 month? You can't, right? Especially when you're helping people digest a new technology or a new product, sometimes they just need time. So if you think about what does $1 million get you? Well, maybe it gets you 3 or 4 people for 1 year, or maybe gets you 1 or 2 employees for 2 or 3 years. And I would spend that $1 million to try to have a run rate, a runway of like 3 years, because I think it takes time. One of my lessons in selling to enterprises and building enterprise solutions is they take quite a bit of time, and it takes time and trial and error to learn how to fix things. And so I want my $1 million. I don't want to just sit on top of it, but I want my $1 million to go as far as I can make it go over a period of 2 or 3 years with 2 or 3 people. And that's the beauty of like AI and all these other tools that enable us to scale is I can build the equivalent of what used to maybe need like 30 or 40 or 50 people. And I can do it with 3 people and some AI tools.
And if you start over as Paul, what would you do? That's more like a general question already.
So I'm old, as you can probably tell, and I don't know about starting over, but I can tell you I'm already thinking about what sort of the next chapter is in my life. I love teaching. I loved writing this book, Ethereum for Business. I love going to universities. I think if you told me, tomorrow, Paul, you can, well, maybe not tomorrow because I love what I do, but at a certain point, Paul, whenever you decide to retire, money's not going to be a concern, right? And you're going to be in good health. I would go and get my PhD. This is so nerdy, but I keep a list of like PhD topics on my laptop. And I would go get a PhD in economics of some kind, and I would go and teach because I love teaching. I love working with kids, and I think as a professor, you get to work with super brilliant kids and do super interesting stuff. And maybe that would lead me to becoming an entrepreneur again. But if it doesn't, it would still be incredibly rewarding.
I also have this idea when I will be like older enough and I will do all my investing and podcasting stuff. I also would love to do the PhD. And economics is my international economics actually is my first background. And I wrote several scientific papers, and it's very interesting. And then you have also this knowledge that you can apply and you can teach people. That's fantastic. Okay, so I think that was a very great interview. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for your amazing insights. It's incredible. One last message to the all enterprises: why they should think that their future is on chain.
So the future is on chain because blockchain is incredibly efficient and powerful way to do business as you know it already today. It will eventually allow you to reshape your business in the future. It is going to be just like the internet, and the just like the internet, the only way that you're really going to learn how to do this is to get on chain and try it. And there is you can study something to death, but if you don't get on chain and figure out how to do this stuff, it's going to be a very painful process to catch up with your competition once they figure out what these business models look like.
All right, so thank you so much. I will put all the links. Also, please follow Paul on the social media and also check the EY tools as well for blockchain. That is, I was also exploring myself, and it's actually a very incredible platform that you have built. So thank you again, and I hope to see you quite soon.
Thank you so much for having me.